Welcome to the Healers Café, the #1 show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart to heart conversations about their day to day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. Welcome to the Healers Cafe. And today I have with me Samantha Bailey. She was actually born and raised in Canada, and that's where we're from. And she moved to Texas in the early 90s, making that her permanent home. She is a mother of 6 and a grandmother of 4, and her whole life has been centered around nurturing and supporting others, which is basically the theme that carried into her professional life. Now, I think the rest, I mean, you've become a certified coach and you work with post-betrayal transformation. I think enough said from my part about you. I just want to welcome you and yeah, I want to ask you how this all transformed and how you got into it and whatever you're willing to share or not,
Sure,
because
sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always a great platform for others to hear that there's hope for healing. And
mm,
I'll go into my story. About 5 years ago, I was living in Hawaii, absolutely loving paradise and enjoying life. Until one day I found out that my husband was having what I thought was one affair. And within a year, and 8 days later, and a bunch of trickle truths and half truths, I found out he was having multiple affairs with sugar babies, escorts, prostitutes, and spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on them on luxury trips, fine dining, designer shopping sprees, five-star hotels, you name it, sex as well. And he, it really put me in a very, very dark place for a long time. I just kept spiraling down, down, down. The more I heard, the less I understood. And it was difficult because, my head would hear something, but my heart felt another thing. So I couldn't connect because it was just like I was in denial almost. Like, even though I knew it was true, I couldn't believe that this man who supposedly was supposed to love me, protect me, honor me, be there for me, was a different man altogether than I knew.
mm. And because betrayal, often the hardest part is that you really believe your reality, the first one,
Right?
Um, so how long had you been together? I mean, obviously, if you've had, what is it, 4 children?
Yeah. Well, we were married just over 20 years.
Mhm.
And it's true. Initially, I didn't, for 3 years when I was in a bad place, I didn't see any signs. I'm like, how could I not know? And, he was so amazing to me and treated me wonderful. And when I started my healing journey, I realized that there were many signs. But
Mhm.
when you trust someone completely, you're not looking for anything. So you take them at their word. But there were many, many signs that I not necessarily ignored. He just was very good at lying and being dishonest and convincing me that I was, the love of his life because he was at the time the love of my life. And it
Mhm.
turned out to be, different from what I thought my world was. It was like someone threw a grenade into my heart and it exploded. And the enemy was my husband, who again was supposed to be there to protect me and love me, and that wasn't the case.
Mm. And did it come up at all in your realization of what was happening, or in his, I guess, when it came out, that there was something not good about it in the sense of he was not well or this was wrong, or or was it just that it's like, how did he work with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, he never blamed me. He actually said that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he blamed it on a lot of childhood trauma. Um, and and it, I understand childhood trauma, but it's difficult for me to see someone make the extreme choices he made,
Mhm,
choices to, set up a profile, choices to, book hotels and trips and everything that he was doing
mhm,
to make his, um, secrecy come to life. And when we married, just after, shortly after, I found out he had a very huge porn addiction that I asked him multiple times to get help for. And he, many promises, yes, I don't want to lose you. I'm going to go get help. But when that dopamine high isn't enough from the porn, he stepped out and acted out.
mhm, mhm. So, yeah, let's talk about what I mean, definitely it's betrayal. But what is betrayal? Like what how would you define it? Really?
Yeah, well, betrayal can happen in many different forms, and it can happen like this betrayal for me was the betrayal of my trust,
Mhm,
basically, and the betrayal of financial infidelity, along with it affecting our children
mhm,
because they were betrayed as well, and they were traumatized because they thought we had this beautiful family unit, and again, it wasn't so. So, betrayal for me is something that can happen to you personally, and it's usually from someone you know and love. It can be a family member, it can be a loved one, it can be a friend. And it affects more than one person. Like I said, my kids were affected. Friends of ours were surprised because um, they thought he was a model citizen, and again, he was so good at hiding things that nobody ever suspected.
mhm, mhm. So you mentioned that there's like typical steps that I mean there's steps you go through, but then there's mistakes that you can avoid. Do you want to just sort of go through that from, yeah, from
Yeah,
your experience?
absolutely. So I think one of the things and reasons why my healing delayed because I was doing so many things wrong. And that's kind of how I came upon writing my book because I realized I journaled a lot, and looking back, I was like, wow, I did that and I did this every day. And I want to share with other, for me, there's no gender bias in betrayal, but for me, it's an understanding from a woman's perspective. So I wanted to make sure no other woman who has experienced betrayal trauma go through the same uh, mistakes that I made. And I also offer suggestions like, find a therapist as soon as you can. One that specializes in betrayal trauma. I went to a couple of therapists initially and shared my story, and they were like, shocked. I don't want my therapist to be shocked. I want help from them.
Yeah, of
And when
course.
they're kind of like, well, what do I say? Because I've never heard this before, and this is all new to me. So it's really good to find someone that is experienced in that area. Also, I would avoid alcohol because alcohol is a depressant. You've already
Mhm,
got a gaping wound. You don't need to pour salt in it.
mhm,
Cannabis as well. It might or might may not offer temporary relief, but again, it's going to delay your healing. And in order
mhm,
to heal, you have to feel. You do have to go through the stages of grief. You can't just go from one place and jump. You have to feel. Sometimes it's a hard place to feel. But in order to get through that to the next stage, you have to experience it.
mhm, mhm. So just to make sure I heard you right, it's like stages of grief, you're saying. It's
Yeah,
S
yeah, it is it feels like a death almost because you've lost the world that you thought you knew. And another thing that I share that I didn't do, thankfully, but not to post your personal things on social media.
Right.
There are some wonderful, wonderful betrayal trauma help groups on Facebook that you
Mm,
can join, and it's private. You can post anonymously if you want. And they're a wonderful group of women who are there to help and assist, especially when you feel alone,
mm,
because that's a very real feeling because you think you're the only one at the time that's going through this. But I want them to know that they're not alone and there
mm,
is help out there.
mhm. So is that one of the hardest part, is feeling isolated or alone, like, or is it the world, your world falling apart? Or are they the kind of the same?
You know, it's such a mix of emotions, and when I first experienced the trauma, it was so like I went into shock, and there were days and times where I don't remember, which, the journaling was so helpful because I could look back and track my healing progress and go, I'm not really going anywhere. I'm kind of stuck. I'm doing the same thing over again. And one of the things that I was doing was constantly looking in my rear view mirror, like looking at Facebook when memories would come up. I would look at especially the dates when he was having affairs or gone on business trips. I was questioning, where was I? Where was he? How could I not know? And I did that every day for 3 years. And so again, I was looking in the rearview mirror and missing opportunities that were ahead of me because I was looking behind me.
Yeah, yeah. So it really is about acknowledging what happened and moving forward. I mean, not avoiding the feelings that you would go through, but not kind of roasting in them,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah, or suppressing them
or
because that's
suppress.
gonna
Right.
harm you in the long run.
Mhm. Yeah. So you need to express them, obviously. But how do you know when you can move forward from that? When you're, how, because obviously, it just like grief and death, images resurface all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Flooding images and
Yeah.
thoughts and triggers, lots of triggers. But I it was 3 years and I'm like, okay, I've accepted it and
Mhm.
I wasn't over it, but I was in a place where um I had accepted it, but there was no joy in my life. I was just miserable and I was still very affected physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And but I thought like, no, I'm okay. I'm gonna move on. And I came upon a website for a quiz that showed you what stage you were in. It was out of one to five when you took the quiz. One being you first found out and you're not in a very good place. Five, you're on the road to healing and you're doing really well.
Mhm.
So my test came back as a number three. And how I like to explain it is I had accepted it, but I was carrying around this big ball and chain. I could go from point A to point B, but it was a very heavy weight
Mhm.
and it was hard to pick up and move and go around, even though I could, but it just really weighed me down. So, one of the first things I did was sign up for one of the courses that they had recommended. And the reason why I loved this website so much is everything was so relatable. It was like, oh, they get me. But everyone involved in the it's the PBT Institute where I also got my certification
Mhm.
has experienced betrayal trauma in one way or another.
Mhm.
Some have stayed with their spouses and some have not. But I loved that they all knew where I was coming from. And I
Mhm.
felt like, oh, they get me.
Mm.
And they have just a variety of different courses that they recommend depending on what stage you're in.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
And
that didn't start until my three. third year in, and
Right.
started
Mhm.
looking brighter and brighter as I went on.
Mhm. So if you were to, like, say 1 or 2, I don't know, sentences or words or points, whatever, that got you from stage 3 to stage 5, what are the main things that made the big
Yeah.
difference?
I stopped looking in the past. That would be the main thing. I stopped looking at Facebook memories.
Okay.
I stopped looking back at his Instagram. I had access to his Instagram and I could see, comments he made to other women and who he was talking to and whatnot. And I would look at that over and over and over again. So I just kind of cold turkeyed it and
Mhm.
went like, I can't keep going back because I'm only going backwards. I need to go forwards. And then that's when that little light started to appear in this dark tunnel. I'm like, that's what I'm shooting for. And
Mhm.
it wasn't easy at first because, there was still temptation. I wanted to look back, but I knew I had to say to myself, is this helping me or is this hurting me? And if the answer was it's going to hurt you, I would avoid it.
Yeah.
What would your life be like if you were pain free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
Mhm. Okay, so not looking at the past, and what else really helped you?
Yeah. Well, the courses that I took
Mhm.
definitely helped me, and also the Dr. Debbie, I call her. She's written several books. I read some of her books. She too had been betrayed in two different. We talk about betrayal in different ways. One was from a family member, and one was from her husband. And she shared that, and it was again, it was just so relatable. So, what works for me might not work for you. So
Mhm.
know that there are different and multiple resources for you because it's healing is not a linear or a straight line. It's got a lot of ups and downs, but
Mhm.
find something that you can connect to and that you can relate to that works for you.
Mhm.
I took some. We did some. It was a couples where we met once a week with other couples who had experienced that. Um, Probably a week or two after I found out, but I was still in a little bit of shock, so I don't remember a lot of that. And,
Mhm.
through the course, he was I was finding out, and he would admit to more information. It turned out to be over 15 different women that he was with in a 2-year period of time. And I was just in like this daze. So, although the courses that I took initially might have been helpful, for me they weren't because I was still in shock.
Right,
And
yeah, yeah.
and I think one-on-one counseling and therapy was critical in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes sense. I mean, you have to get out of the shock phase first.
Yeah, yeah.
Before
And
you
baby steps, everyone's healing journey and timeline. Same with grief, there's no timeline for that.
Mhm.
So self care is really important. And, you don't have to worry about others at this point. I know sometimes you're a young mother and you're just in a daze doing what you have to do to get through the day, um, and take care of your children. And then you feel guilty because, oh, I don't remember what my children were doing. But it's okay because you'll come around.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. And the dynamics, it doesn't have to be you and your children because that's your good story, but from what you've heard of others, the impact on the family, was there, did you have to, not you necessarily, I just want to protect your right to keep your life private,
Yeah,
but
that's
i- was there like, because I have heard, and certainly when I was in practice, that there's sometimes your own family turns against you or needs to blame somebody. And in fact, they'll blame often the victim rather than the perpetrator.
yeah.
Um, have you
That
come across that phenomenon?
No, that wasn't the case with my children, and I actually had my husband share with them. Um, Personally, I wasn't in the room so that they could ask questions and not feel like they were going to hurt me or affect me. And some of my kids were very angry with him and
Mhm.
didn't want anything to do with him whatsoever. I actually bridged that gap for them because he was and is a great father and was always there for them in good and bad times. And I told them, I said, he's been there for you good times and bad times. And this is a bad time for him. And he needs you there for him. And
Mhm.
slowly, with my encouragement, they started communicating and they all have a good relationship now. But I didn't want them to have to choose sides.
Right.
That's not fair to them. That's going to cause more, trauma for them.
Mhm.
And it just wasn't fair. I wanted them to feel um, as close as they could to both of us without,
Mhm.
you know, putting the bad things that he did to me in the midst of it.
Mhm. Mhm. But I mean, it sounds like he's able to acknowledge that this was not good behavior, as in that he needed some sort of help, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
not. It's
Oh,
he,
yeah. He needed help, a lot of it.
yeah, yeah.
And apparently he's gotten that help, which is, good, great for him. We're no longer together. We divorced January this year,
Mhm.
because he could not remain faithful, and that was one of my boundaries. And
Yeah.
these women that he was with were very beautiful women, opposite of me, dark hair, petite. I'm 5'10", I'm not petite. And, I got to a point where I felt I had empathy for him because none of these women would have been with him had he not been paying them. And to
Mhm.
me, wow, to feel love and affection that way is so empty. And
Mhm.
I, the women were aged 19 to 29. And a week before our 20th anniversary, he was with a 27-year-old, paid her for sex, went to a hotel, and didn't realize that I had found out there's a backstory to that.
Mhm.
So on our 20th anniversary, I served him with divorce papers.
Mhm. Jeez. Wow.
And
Hmm.
he agreed to all the terms. So that was a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. But I mean, there's a thing as, addiction, and there are people who need help and don't get it, so yeah, it's a big thing to come to the other side and go, wow, okay, this person is a person, like you said, was a dad, is a dad, was there, and still in a sense, I don't know whether forgive is the right word, but it doesn't impact you the same way anymore. It's like, here's an individual that needed help and you don't need to be in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Forgiveness is huge in this because it really frees you.
Mhm.
It's forgiving, not forgetting, but it's forgiving them, um, so that you're not carrying that heavy burden around anymore, resentment and anger, and it just frees you and it lets you move forward.
Mhm.
And sometimes you have to do it over and over again because there were times that I feel resentful and angry, and I just have to stop and say a prayer and go, I'm not going there anymore. I've forgiven this and I'm ready to just move forward. So sometimes that happens.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, you have lived a very personal situation in this case, but there are betrayals that are like in our society, there are betrayals that are less personal, as in, the medical system or the government and
Right. Right.
I've certainly heard from many of my patients these kind of feelings. Any any insight you have about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I recently, a couple of years ago, actually, my mother had hip replacement, and I felt like she was betrayed because she had to wait over 2 years and live
Mm,
in excruciating pain before she, you know, got to have that surgery done. And
mhm,
yet, anyone in the professional athletic field, if they're injured, were taken care of immediately. So to
mhm,
me, that just wasn't fair.
mhm,
That's one example I can think of. Of course, we're experiencing this election coming up, and boy, I don't know what's going to happen. Be interesting to see what comes of it on Tuesday.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. And there's also like the whole medical, paradigm that safe and effective, that was brought on people. And I can see it wasn't as bad in the States, but in Canada, if you chose not to, for example, take the recommended treatment, um you couldn't leave the country. You were treated as a lesser citizen. You
Wow.
weren't restaurants, you weren't allowed. And until about a month ago in British Columbia, you weren't allowed to be a healthcare worker anymore. So you lost your job. So there's a lot of betrayal, now that finally the censorship is breaking and, we know that it wasn't safe, it wasn't effective, and there's people's choices, but there's a lot of sense of betrayal there. But it's different when it's not personal, and but it
Yeah,
also feel like the whole world is against, and at least in my chats with people, I say, well, you're not alone. That was one of the biggest things is, other people talk with them and, connect on that level.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
people's lives have been ruined, from this as well. It's
Right.
not just, because it's wrong. Everything has impact, But anyway, no, that's why I was asking, because when you've gone through it personally, what else, not being alone, I think is the one that stands out the strongest. And I
Yeah, that's
don't,
key, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's hard, you don't want to make excuses for the government because it's very easy to re-victimize yourself by, you know, by saying
Absolutely.
they
And
did
avoid
better.
um, political talks in all
Mhm.
arenas, especially social media, because I see what people post and, you
Yeah.
know, got both sides fighting. And it's just like, oh, I want nothing to do with that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's gonna be very interesting to see what comes out of
Yeah,
that.
I'll be watching the
But
TV.
you're your book will be timely as well, because
Yes,
I think
indeed.
people will be, I think that's the predominant feeling that people have, at
Yeah.
least from those I'm in contact with. Anyway, so look, we're actually at the end of our time together. You have a book, right, that you've written?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually
Wanna
coming
share
out
a
in
little bit?
December. It's
Oh,
called
oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, it's called Deceptive Liaisons. And if you go to my website and put your name and email address, you'll be the first to know when it is released for pre-purchase. And all of the 100% profits from pre-orders, pre-sales are going to feedingamerica.org.
Mhm.
And that'll happen 2 weeks before it hits the shelves. And it'll be on every Amazon, it'll be audiobook, ebook, paperback, hardcover, um, Kindle, you name it, Barnes and
Mm.
Noble. So yeah, I'm excited. It is help the number 4 betrayaltrauma.com. And if you click on pre-order, scroll down and put your name and email address, you'll be the first and only group that will get to pre-purchase it before it hits the shelves.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for spending time sharing your experience and
Well,
your
thank you.
wisdom.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on, as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.